The great viewing hall of the Harmonium station was quiet. It was a vast room, all soft light and smooth, pale walls. It felt peaceful, a place made for calm thought and polite talk. Delegates from many different worlds stood or sat in small groups. They spoke in low voices. The air smelled faintly of clean metal and the unique sense of a dozen different species. A group of 3 humans stood near a large window that looked out at the stars. They felt small in the big room. The man looking out the window was named Ji-hun. He was an environmental biologist. His job was to understand how living things and their worlds work together. He watched a shuttle fly past the window, his face thoughtful. Next to him, a woman named Mina checked the small device on her wrist. She was a xenolinguist. Her job was to understand languages, both spoken and not. She was making sure their translation software was working perfectly. She wanted no mistakes today. The third human, Captain Taeshik, stood with his hands behind his back. He was the leader of their small research ship, the Wayfinder. He did not look anxious. He looked calm and watchful, like a man used to seeing new things. He observed the other delegations with a polite but distant interest. Across the room, a much taller figure moved. This was Kale, a scholar from the Zalcorian people. He was big, with thick, grayish skin that looked like stone. His clothes were formal and dark. He moved with a slow, heavy confidence. Many people watched him with clear respect. The Zalcorians were known as strong warriors and proud scientists. A softer, gentler figure approached the humans. Her skin had a faint green tone, like the underside of a leaf. She was Alara, a Venoran scientist. Her people were known for diplomacy and a deep love of knowledge. "Welcome," Alara said, her voice like a soft chime. The device on Mina's wrist translated her words into English. "You are the delegation from Earth, correct? The humans?" Mina smiled and gave a small nod. "Yes, I am Mina. This is Ji-hun, and our captain, Taeshik. We are grateful for the invitation to this symposium. The theme is understanding through shared reality," Alara said. "A noble goal. We share our histories, our arts, and today, our perspectives on nature." Kale will begin the proceedings. His people have a great respect for strength and survival. His presentation is said to be very striking. Ji-hun turned from the window. "What is the topic?" he asked. "He will show us the most lethal hunters from many of our worlds," Alara explained. "The idea is to foster respect, to see the challenges each species has overcome in its own home, to understand the will to live that shapes a culture." Captain Taeshik gave a slow nod. "A display of apex predators. Interesting." Ji-hun's eyes lit up with professional interest. "Fascinating. The evolutionary pressures that create such specialized life forms." Mina listened, but she was also watching the room. She saw how the other groups moved. She heard the tones in their voices, even if she did not know the words. The Zalcorians stood very straight. The Venorans made slow, flowing gestures. A few other species seemed nervous, their eyes darting around. This was more than a simple science lecture. This was a cultural performance about power. A low, resonant tone sounded through the hall. The soft lights dimmed slightly. Everyone began to move towards the rows of comfortable, adaptable seats. The humans found a place to sit near the back. Alara sat beside them, offering a friendly glance to the front of the room. A large, clear screen appeared from the floor. Kale walked to a platform before it. He looked out at the crowd, his posture full of pride. "Delegates, beings of knowledge," Kale began. His translated voice was deep and formal. "We gather to build bridges across the stars. To understand each other, we must understand the worlds that forged us. We must see the teeth and claws of our home worlds, not with fear, but with respect. For in overcoming such dangers, a people finds its spirit." On the screen behind him, a beautiful but deadly-looking planet appeared. It had rings of sharp, purple rock. "Today, I will show you the pinnacle of predatory evolution from several of our honored species. These are not monsters. They are perfection. They are the final word of their ecosystems. By seeing them, you see a part of our souls." Ji-hun leaned forward, his notebook open on his knee. He was ready to take notes on biology, on adaptation. Mina watched Kale's body language, noting the way he held his arms wide when he spoke of strength. Taeshik simply watched, his face still calm, but his eyes missing nothing. The first clip began. It showed a creature from a Zalcorian moon, a six-legged thing with a shell that shimmered with heat. It hunted by spraying superheated gas. The audience made a low sound of awe. Ji-hun wrote down thermochemical predation and sketched the creature's leg structure. More clips followed. Each one was more incredible than the last. A creature that swam through liquid methane. A flying beast that created stunning, hypnotic light patterns before striking. The humans watched with intense scientific curiosity. They saw amazing biology, complex and effective. They did not gasp or look away in fear. To them, in this safe room, these were just very well-adapted animals. Mina noticed the reactions of others, however. The Venoran next to her, Alara, would tense slightly at each new horror. A small, furry delegate from another world covered its eyes at one point. This was not just a science lesson for them. It was a reminder of deep, ancestral fear. Kale's commentary was full of respect. "Observe the flawless strike," he would say, or, "See the absolute efficiency. No waste. Pure survival." Finally, the screen went dark for a moment. Kale turned to face them all again. The hall was completely silent. "And now," he said, his voice dropping to a graver tone, "the last presentation, from the dead world of Xylos, a place so harsh only one supreme hunter could rule it. We believe this creature represents the highest, most lethal form of solitary predator in the known galaxy. Behold, the Gravlian." The screen flashed to life, and the humans, along with everyone else, saw the monster for the first time. The creature on the screen was a masterpiece of terror. It moved through a jagged, rust-colored landscape under a sickly yellow sky. It was the size of a large ground vehicle, with 6 powerful legs that ended in cruel, hooked claws. Its body was covered in interlocking plates that looked like polished gunmetal, naturally formed but as hard as any starship hull. This was the Gravlion. It did not roar or snarl. It moved with a silent, awful purpose. The footage showed it stalking a massive, slow-moving beast with armored hide. The Gravlion seemed to gather itself, and then the air around it shimmered. A faint, visible distortion raced out from its body and struck the prey. The larger beast stumbled, its leg buckling as if under immense, sudden weight. It was a gravity pulse, a localized crush of invisible force. Ji-hun's pen stopped moving. He stared, his biologist's mind racing to understand the mechanics. "Fascinating," he whispered. "It must have specialized internal organs, mass manipulators on a cellular level. The energy cost would be enormous." Mina listened, but her focus was on the silent communication of the hunt. The Gravlian showed no excitement, no rage. It was a cold engine of consumption. It delivered 2 more precise gravity strikes, pinning the struggling prey to the ground. Then it moved in, using not teeth, but a sharp, bony protrusion from its face to pierce a seam in the armor. The feeding was methodical and quiet. The audience in the hall was perfectly still. You could hear the faint hum of the station systems. The Venoran, Alara, sat rigid, her large eyes fixed on the screen. A Zalcorian near the front gave a low grunt of approval. This was a predator they could understand. Unstoppable, armored, supremely powerful in direct conflict. The footage cut to another scene. The Gravlian was alone on a high cliff, looking out over the dead world. Nothing moved below. It had wiped out all competition. It was the absolute ruler of its silent, brutal kingdom. "Observe." Kale's voice broke the silence, full of deep respect. "Perfection of form and function. It has no natural enemy. It has mastered the fundamental force of gravity itself to hunt. Its armor can withstand the fall of a mountain. On Xylos, it is the final word in life. It is the apex. To see it is to see the ultimate expression of solitary power in the cosmos." Captain Taeshik watched, his face still calm, but a small frown had appeared between his eyebrows. He was not a biologist. He was a pilot and an explorer. He saw patterns of behavior, of strategy. He saw the total emptiness of the landscape. He saw a creature that had won so completely, its world was now just a bare pantry. There was a loneliness to it that felt wrong. The final clip began. It showed the Gravelian again, finishing a meal from a previous kill. The twisted body of some unfortunate creature lay beside a sparse, black forest of tall, thin trees. The Gravelian was tearing off the last pieces of flesh. Suddenly, its head snapped up. It was not a slow, confident movement. It was a jerk. Its entire body went still for a second, listening. Then, from the dark branches of the forest, a flock of small creatures burst into the air. They were blue, with 4 wings and long, trailing tail feathers. They chirped and chittered, a sound like breaking glass and ringing bells. There were perhaps 20 of them. They fluttered down to the ground not far from the kill, pecking at the soil, completely ignoring the giant predator. The Gravelian's reaction was instant. It backed away from its meal. It hunched its armored shoulders, not in an attack posture, but in a defensive crouch. It took one last, quick tear of meat, then turned and scrambled away from the forest edge, moving with a haste that looked entirely new. It left more than half of the carcass behind. In moments, it was gone over a ridge. The screen went dark. The hall lights slowly came back up. A wave of relieved sighs and soft chatter moved through the crowd. The presentation was over. The terrible, beautiful predator was gone. Kale stood tall on the platform, his stone-like skin looking even more solid in the light. "The Gravelian of Xylos," he announced, his tone one of solemn conclusion. "The galaxy's most lethal hunter. A reminder that true strength is absolute, and survival is the highest law." Polite, respectful gestures of acknowledgement came from the delegates. The Zalcorians placed a fist over their chests. The Venorans waved their long fingers in a specific pattern. It was over. The humans watched the rituals, but they did not join in. Ji-hun was staring at the blank screen, his earlier fascination replaced by a deep, puzzled frown. He looked down at his notes, then back up. The image in his mind was not of the gravity crush or the natural armor. It was the final moments, the quick, nervous departure, the abandoned food. Mina leaned towards him, her voice a whisper. "Did you see its posture change when the birds appeared? The neck retracted, the forelegs bent inward. That's not a leaving posture. On most species, that's an I am vulnerable posture." Yihan nodded slowly. "And the energy loss, it gave up a huge amount of food. For no clear reason." He looked at Captain Taeshik. The captain's eyes met his. Taeshik had seen it too. Something was wrong with the story. On the platform, Kale was ready for questions. He looked out, expecting inquiries about the Gravelian's gravity organ, or the composition of its armor. He expected discussions of supreme power. Ji-hun glanced at Mina, then at Taeshik. The captain gave a single, almost invisible nod. It was enough. Ji-hun raised his hand. The gesture of a raised hand was simple and common on Earth. In the great hall of the harmonium, it was seen by all. The polite chatter following the presentation died away. Eyes turned towards the human Ji-hun. Kale on the platform noticed the movement. He gave a slow, acknowledging nod. He was prepared for a technical question. He expected the human to ask about mass limits or gravitational field strength. Mina quickly activated her translator to its most public setting, her fingers moving with practiced ease. A soft light on her device blinked, indicating it would now broadcast the translation of Ji-hun's words for the entire hall. "The Gravelian is a remarkable example of adaptation," Ji-hun began, his voice clear but respectful. He was a scientist speaking to a fellow scholar, his tone free of challenge, full of only curiosity. "The energy required to manipulate local gravity fields must be immense. Its evolutionary pathway is fascinating." Kale gave another nod, a hint of pride in his stiff posture. This was the kind of respect he had anticipated. Ji-hun continued. "However, in the final segment of the footage, I observed a point of confusion." He paused, choosing his words carefully. As the creature finished feeding near the forest edge, its behavior changed dramatically. It initiated a rapid retreat. Can you tell me why it was running from those birds? For a moment, there was only silence. The translated words hung in the air. Then, a soft ripple of confused murmurs moved through the delegates. They looked at each other, then back at the human. The question made no sense. Kale's heavy brow furrowed. He blinked slowly, processing the query. The birds? He repeated, the words sounding strange in his deep voice. You refer to the avics. They are benign fauna, scavengers of seeds and small insects, a minor presence. On the large screen behind Kale, the final seconds of the footage reappeared. The Gravelian, this mountain of lethal power, was frozen in its defensive hunch. In the background, the flock of small, blue, four-winged creatures was clearly visible, pecking harmlessly at the dirt. The Gravelian was concluding its meal, Kale explained, his tone implying the answer was obvious. It was departing the area. The arrival of the avics was merely coincidental. It was not running from them. Jihan did not sit down. His polite frown deepened. He was not satisfied. The scientist in him saw data that did not fit the model. I understand, he said. But watch its posture, please, just before it moves. He pointed at the screen. Kale, with a faint air of impatience, replayed the last 5 seconds. The hall watched again. The Gravelian finished a bite, then its head shot up. His body coiled inward, plates shifting. It looked directly at the fluttering avics, not with predatory interest, but with what seemed like sharp attention. Then it scrambled back, leaving the bulk of the carcass. It adopted a defensive position, Jihan said. It hunched, making itself smaller. That is not a dominant predator ending a meal. That is an animal perceiving a threat. And it abandoned over half of its kill. The caloric cost of that hunt was enormous. No solitary, efficient predator would give up that much energy without a very good reason. A minor presence is not a good enough reason. The murmuring in the hall grew slightly louder. The Venoran, Elara, leaned forward, her leafy skin tinged with a curious yellow hue. She was no longer looking at the screen, but at Jihan. Kale shifted his weight. The human's persistence was bordering on disrespect. You are applying your terrestrial logic to a Xylosian life form, he stated. Their motivations are their own. The Gravelian is the apex. There is no threat to it on its world. You are misreading simple behavior. It was then that Mina spoke. Her voice was softer than Jihan's, but her words were precise. If I may, she said, and all eyes turned to her. My field is communication, not just words but sound, posture, intent. Our audio pickups are very good. May I play the enhanced audio from that moment? The translator can render the frequencies for us. Kale hesitated, but a wave of curiosity from the audience was clear. He gave a stiff nod of consent. Mina worked her device. A moment later, the hall was filled with sound. Not the grand silence of space or the crunch of bone, but the high, clear chirping of the avics. And underneath it, something else. A low, almost subsonic vibration from the Gravelian. It was a deep, rumbling pulse that faded quickly as the creature fled. That low sound, Mina said, stopping the playback. It is not a growl of warning. In predator species across many worlds, that particular sonic signature, when combined with that body posture, most commonly indicates alarm. It is not the sound of something annoyed by a nuisance. It is the sound of something that is startled or afraid. The word afraid seemed to vibrate in the silent hall. The idea was absurd, laughable, and yet the two humans presented a puzzle. The body language, the abandoned food, the sound. They were not arguing with passion, but with simple, observed facts. Captain Tashik had remained silent this whole time, watching Kale, watching the crowd. Now he saw Elara, the Venoran scientist, raise a delicate hand. Her voice, when she spoke, was filled not with challenge, but with a genuine, burning need to know. Scholar Kale, Elara said, the humans raise interesting points of observation. If the AVIX are harmless, what, in your expert opinion, could have caused such a pronounced reaction in the Gravelian? Could there be something else? Something we did not see. Kale was silent. He stared at the frozen image on the screen, the mighty hunter, the tiny birds, and the half-eaten kill. He had no answer. The perfect story of solitary, supreme power had a crack in it, and the humans had gently tapped it with a single, innocent question. The silence in the hall stretched. It was no longer a quiet of respect, but one of profound confusion. All eyes were on Kale, waiting for his answer to Alara's question. The Zalkorian scholar stood very still, his stony face unreadable. He looked from the curious Venoran to the puzzled humans, and then back to the image on the screen. Finally, he spoke, his voice still firm but lacking its earlier certainty. The Gravelian psychology is not fully mapped. It is a creature of a dead world. Perhaps it has an instinctive aversion to the AVIX's call. A minor genetic memory. It does not change the facts. The Gravelian is the strongest physical being on Xylos. Nothing there can challenge it. Jihan slowly sat down, but he was not finished. He spoke calmly, thinking out loud. On Earth, he said, small birds often behave like that. They flock and make noise. But they are not brave. They are nervous. They do it when they sense a threat to their nests, to their young. They are an alarm system. They are not the danger. They are a sign that danger might be near. He looked around the room, trying to make them understand a basic rule of his home world. A top predator on Earth does not fear the birds, but it learns to listen to them, because the birds are often the first to see something else, something that moves quietly, something the predator missed because it was focused on its meal. A new kind of quiet fell. It was deeper. The idea settled into the minds of the delegates. It was a small idea, but it was like a crack in a dam. Captain Tashik watched the faces in the crowd. He saw the moment the meaning shifted. It was not about the birds. It was about what the birds meant. Alara's large eyes were wide. You are saying the Gravelian was not afraid of the AVIX. It was afraid of what the AVIX were afraid of. It was afraid of what their calls might bring. Exactly, Jihan said, nodding. It wasn't running from the birds. It was running from a warning it clearly understood. Kale let out a low sound, like grinding rock. This is speculation, a story from your world. You see your own experiences in our data. Xylos is empty. Our surveys show no other large life signs. The Gravelian is alone. Your surveys look for what you expect to find, Mina said gently. They look for something like the Gravelian, something big, something that uses energy, something that walks heavily. What if the thing the Gravelian fears isn't like that? What if it is quiet? What if it doesn't show up on your scans the way you think it should? A delegate from a smaller, furry species squeaked a question, which was translated. What kind of creature could scare the Gravelian? It has gravity weapons. It has armor. Jihan spread his hands. I don't know. That's the point. We don't know what's on Xylos. We only know what one creature there is afraid of. And it's afraid enough to give up a huge meal and run. That tells us something very important. It tells us the Gravelian is not the top of the food chain. It is in the middle. The word middle seemed to shock the room more than the word afraid. To call the galaxy's most lethal hunter a middle creature was an insult. It broke their whole understanding of the universe. Strength was clear. Power was visible. You could measure it in claws and energy weapons. Kale was visibly struggling. His pride was wounded, but he was also a scientist. The human's logic was simple and clear, built from observation. It was hard to fight. So, you claim there is a super predator on Xylos. One we have never seen. One that hunts the Gravelian. Where is it? Why have we never detected it? We may have just seen its shadow, Captain Tashik said, speaking for the first time since the questioning began. Every head turned to him. His voice was quiet, steady, and carried a weight that Jihan's curiosity and Mina's analysis did not. We saw the reaction of an animal that knows the rules of its world better than any scanner ever will. The birds chirped. The Gravelian knew the rules. It knew that sound in that place at that time meant leave now. It didn't wait to see what would come. It just ran. He paused, looking at the frozen image one last time. That is not the behavior of a king. That is the behavior of prey. The dam broke. The hall erupted into a wave of noise. Not loud shouts, but intense, urgent conversation in a dozen different languages. The Zalcorians argued among themselves, their deep voices rumbling. The Venorans gestured rapidly, their colors shifting with excitement. The simple, peaceful understanding of the symposium was gone. Elara stood up. Her voice, amplified by her own device, cut through the chatter. This changes everything. This is not about one predator. This is about a whole unseen layer of ecology. A hidden reality. Kale stared at the humans, his earlier pride replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable realization. They had not come to marvel at his galaxy's horrors. They had come and, with one simple question, had rewritten the lesson entirely. They had looked at the ultimate killer and asked why it was scared. And in asking that, they had suggested something truly terrifying. That the most frightening thing in the dark might not be the thing that growls, but the thing that is so quiet, the only warning is the sound of everything else running away. The chaos in the hall settled into a thick, heavy quiet. The delegates were no longer arguing. They were thinking. The humans' words were not an attack, but a key that had unlocked a new and frightening room in their minds. They had come to share stories of great hunters, and had instead been given a lesson about the hunted. Kale looked defeated. His grand presentation had been dismantled, not by a bigger weapon, but by a sharper observation. He walked slowly back to his own people, his head lowered. The story of the Gravelian was broken, and with it, a certain story of the universe. Elara, however, was more alive than ever. She turned to Ji-hun, her voice a mix of awe and urgency. This listening you speak of, this reading of signs, it is not just about fear, is it? It is a way of seeing connections. Ji-hun nodded, feeling the focus shift to him. He was just a biologist, but here, his knowledge of Earth felt like a secret code. Yes, everything is connected. The birds, the insects, the wind, the plants. On Earth, a good hunter does not just track the prey. They read the whole forest. They know that frightened deer mean a predator is near. They know that a sudden silence in the birds means something dangerous is hiding. It is a language of life and death. Mina added, and it is a language of patterns. The Gravelian knew one pattern. When the Avix call in that certain way at the forest's edge, it is time to leave. It did not need to know why. It just needed to know the rule. It had learned one word of that forest's language. The word for danger. Captain Tashik watched the other species. He saw them struggling with the idea. To most of them, nature was a thing to be mastered, a challenge to be overcome. To hear it described as a language to be learned was strange. A small, reptilian delegate, who had been silent until now, spoke in a hissing whisper that was translated. So you are saying your people never mastered your world? You remained prey. Tashik considered the question. We mastered parts of it, he said carefully. We built shelters. We made tools. We tamed fire. But we never mastered the dark. We never mastered the deep forest or the deep ocean. We learned to move through them. We learned their rules. We became very good at not being seen, and even better at seeing what others missed. He looked at the image of the Gravelian, still frozen on the screen. That creature is a master of one thing: direct force. It is the strongest thing in its valley. But what if the true danger on Xylos does not fight in the valley? What if it lives in the trees the Avix fly from? Or under the ground? What if it doesn't fight at all but just takes? The Gravelian has no tools for that. It only knows one rule: be the strongest. But on Earth, the strongest lion can still be brought down by tiny poison insects it never saw. Or by a sickness from the water. There is no single rule for survival. There are thousands. Elara's mind was racing ahead. So your strength is not in being the hardest or the heaviest. It is in perception, in pattern recognition. You see the world as a web of warnings and opportunities. In a way, Mina agreed. Our history is not just about conquering beasts. It is about learning from them, learning what their sounds mean, learning where they go for water, learning what they fear. We did not just hunt animals. We studied them. To us, the predator is also a signpost, telling us something about the land. The Zalcorian who had called it coward's talk earlier now spoke again. His voice quieter, confused. But this is a weak way to live. Always watching, always listening, always afraid. Jihan shook his head. It is not about living in fear. It is about respecting complexity. The Gravlian's world is simple. It is the boss. Our world was never simple. So we had to become complex. We had to develop patience. We had to develop memory. We had to learn to think ahead, to ask what happens next. He pointed at the screen. The Gravlian didn't ask, what happens next? It just knew to run. It had learned the pattern but not the reason. We are the species that always asks for the reason. A profound realization was dawning on the assembled delegates. The humans were not describing a failing. They were describing a different kind of power. A power that did not rely on being the biggest monster in the room, but on understanding the entire room better than anyone else. They had looked at the ultimate expression of solitary power and had instantly looked past it, searching for the context. They saw the hunter not as the end of the story, but as a character in a larger, unseen narrative. Elara looked from the humans to Kale and his people, and then to the others. The purpose of the symposium had been understanding. Now they had it, but it was not the understanding anyone had planned. You came to show us your monsters, she said softly, mostly to herself. And they showed us they are not afraid of them. They are curious about them. What does that make them? No one answered. The hall was silent, waiting for the humans to provide the final, terrible piece of the puzzle. The lesson was not over. It had just turned a page. The grand hall of the Harmonium Station was no longer a place of quiet learning. It was a hive of nervous energy. The polite, shared respect had shattered. Now there was a frantic buzz of debate, confusion, and a strange, new kind of fear. The humans sat at the center of it all, a calm island in a swirling sea of alien agitation. Kale remained on the platform, but his authority had crumbled. He was no longer a teacher. He was a man defending a failed idea. He tried to speak over the noise, his deep voice struggling. Order. This is mere theory, a story from a wet, crowded world. It does not apply to the dead rocks of Xylos. But few were listening to him now. They were listening to the idea, and the idea was spreading. Elara, the Venoran scientist, had moved closer to the humans. Her eyes shone with an intense, bright curiosity. Your world, she said to Jihan, her voice quick. Tell me more about these birds, these alarm systems. What are they afraid of? Jihan felt the weight of the room's attention. He kept his voice level, simple. On Earth, it could be many things. Sometimes it is a rival predator. A pack of wolves might scare away a single bear from a kill. But sometimes, he paused, choosing his words. Sometimes it is something that doesn't want to fight the bear at all. Something that would rather the bear just go away. A scavenger? Asked a thin, insect-like delegate. Its clicks translated instantly. Not just a scavenger, Mina answered. She understood the nuance. A creature that sees the bear itself as potential food, but prefers easier meals. Or a creature that is so dangerous. The bear knows a fight is a loss, no matter who wins. On our world, sometimes the warning is for the quiet hunter. The one that climbs trees. The one that hides in the tall grass. The one you don't see until it's too late. Captain Tashik watched the crowd. He saw the understanding change on their faces. It was moving from confusion to a slow, cold dread. They were starting to grasp the human perspective, and it was frightening them more than the Gravlian ever had. A Zalcorian, smaller than Kale but with the same stony skin, stood up. This is coward's talk, he declared, his translated voice rough. You speak of hiding and running. The Gravlian has the power to crush anything. Why would it run from a story? Why would it run from a guess? Jihan looked at the Zalcorian. He did not argue. He just asked a question back. If you are the strongest warrior in a room, but someone whispers that the air is poison, do you stay to prove your strength? Or do you run to the door? The Gravelian didn't stay to fight an enemy. It ran from a warning. It chose survival over pride. That is not cowardice. That is intelligence. The word intelligence hung in the air. It was a different kind of intelligence. Not the kind that built ships or manipulated gravity, but a deep, old, instinctive knowledge. The knowledge of the forest. The knowledge of the grass. Kale finally stepped down from the platform. He walked heavily toward the human group. The crowd parted for him. He stopped in front of Captain Tashik. He seemed to recognize the human as the leader. You, Kale said, his voice low, you look like a warrior. Your stance. Your eyes. Do you believe this? Do you believe the greatest hunter runs from shadows? Tashik met his gaze. He did not look away. I believe what I see, the captain said calmly. I see an animal that knows its own world. On Earth, the oldest, wisest predators are not the boldest. They are the most careful. They have survived because they know when to be bold and when to be gone. They listen to the world. The Gravelian was listening, and it decided to be gone. He looked around at all the delegates now, his calm voice carrying. You have shown us creatures that are the final word in their worlds. The ultimate power. My people, we never had that luxury. On Earth, there was always something else. Something bigger, faster, quieter, or smarter. We were never the final word. We had to become something else. What? Alara breathed the question, captivated. We had to become the ones who understood the words, Tashik said. All of them. The growl, the chirp, the silence. We had to learn that the most important sound is not the roar of the monster. It is the silence that comes after the birds stop singing. A deep chill seemed to settle over the hall. The concept was clear and utterly alien to most of them. Their civilizations had conquered their monsters. They had become the monsters of their own worlds. Humanity had not. They had lived in a world where the monsters never left, and so they had learned a different skill. They had learned to read the signs. Kale stared at Tashik, then at Jihan and Mina. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by a weary, profound realization. He had wanted to show them the apex of creation. But the humans had shown him something more terrifying. They had shown him that in their eyes, an apex predator was just another piece of a larger, more dangerous puzzle. And they were the ones who studied the puzzle. The simple question had been answered. The Gravelian was running because it heard a warning. But the real, unspoken question now echoed in every mind in the room. What kind of people look at the galaxy's most lethal hunter and only wonder what it's afraid of? The silence was complete. The delegates from a dozen worlds looked at the three humans, and for the first time, they did not see harmless, curious newcomers. They saw something else. The question Alara had whispered hung in the air. What does that make them? Captain Tashik felt the change in the room. It was not hostility. It was a kind of cold, slow fear. They had come to share stories of their greatest dangers, and the humans had treated those dangers as interesting puzzles. This was the final piece of understanding, and it was chilling. He stood up. He did not move to the platform. He simply stood beside his crew, facing the room. His voice was calm, the voice of a man stating simple facts. You have shown us hunters, he began. We thank you. They are impressive, perfect for their worlds. He paused, looking at the frozen Gravelian on the screen one last time. But humanity did not evolve to be the strongest hunter in the forest. We evolved in a forest full of stronger hunters. We could not outrun them all. We could not outfight them all. He looked around, meeting the eyes of Kale, of Alara, of all of them. So we learned to do something else. We learned to outthink the forest. The strongest tiger is quiet. So we learned to listen better. The wolf pack works as a team. So we learned to work as a better team. The bear has thick skin and sharp claws. So we learned to attack from farther away. We learned from every creature that scared us. We turned their strengths into lessons. Jihan added, his voice softer but clear. To us, an apex predator is just data. It tells us about the weather, about the plants, about the other animals. It is a piece of a system. We don't just see the monster. We see the whole system it lives in. We see the birds that warn of it. We see the grasses that hide it. We see the paths it walks.
Mina nodded.
That is why we asked about the birds. It was the most important part of the clip. Not the monster, the reaction, the fear. That tells the real story. The monster is just a thing. This fear is information. Kale finally spoke again. His voice was rough, tired. So you are saying you are greater than the Gravelian? Because you are smarter. Tashik shook his head.
No.
We are saying we are different. The Gravelian is a master of its one game. Force. It is a champion in an empty arena. Humanity never got an empty arena. Our arena was always full. So we never became champions of one thing. We became students of everything in the arena. We became generalists, survivalists. He let the words settle. That is what you saw today. You saw a specialist, a perfect killer. And you saw generalists looking at it. We were not impressed by its weapons. We were curious about its behavior. Because behavior tells you what else is out there. Alara understood now. The cold feeling in the room was not just fear of a new idea. It was the specific fear of being observed, of being studied. The humans looked at the galaxy's most lethal hunter and instantly looked past it, searching for the hidden context. What did they see when they looked at them? At the Zalcorians, the Venorans, the others? You see us the same way, don't you? Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper, but the translator carried it. Not as people first, but as parts of a system, as data. Mina looked at her, and her gaze was honest, and for the first time, the others saw the gentle, relentless curiosity for what it was. A fundamental part of who they were. It is how we see everything, Mina admitted softly. It is not disrespect. It is just how we are built. We look for patterns, for connections, for the birds that no one else is watching. The symposium was over. Its goal of mutual understanding had been achieved, but not in the way anyone had planned. They did not understand each other's strengths. They understood each other's natures. The other species saw themselves as masters of their domains. They now saw humans as something else, the perpetual students of every domain. The ones who, upon entering a new forest, did not look for the biggest creature to fight. They listened for the birds to go silent. Captain Tashik gave a final, small nod to the assembly. Thank you for the lesson, he said, and he meant it. The humans gathered their things. As they walked towards the exit, the crowd parted for them again. But this time it was different. Before, they had been ignored, seen as unimportant. Now, the other delegates looked at them with wide, uncertain eyes. They were not looking at colleagues. They were looking at the quiet, watchful creatures from the forest that even the apex predators feared. The Gravelian was running from birds. The birds were warning of something worse. And humanity, these calm, pattern-seeking creatures, were the only ones in the room who had thought to ask why. They weren't the monsters in the dark. They were the reason the monsters were afraid of the dark. The story was finished. A new, much more complicated story had just begun.